When you close your eyes and think of Florence, Italy, what's the first image that pops into your head?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, it's the Renaissance. I see Michelangelo's David, the terracotta dome of the Duomo, the Uffizi Gallery, maybe, having a glass of Chianti while looking out over the Arno River. It is literally the cradle of Western art and beauty.
Exactly. It's this ultimate symbol of enlightenment, but for a very specific period.
Very dark period.
Yeah, nearly 20 years. From 1968 to 1985, that same beautiful Tuscan countryside was the backdrop for something primal and just absolutely terrifying.
It really was.
It wasn't a scene from a romance novel, it was a slaughterhouse.
Right.
We're talking about the Monster of Florence.
It is such a jarring contrast when you really think about it. You have a city defined by culture and high art, and just outside its medieval walls, out in those rolling hills, you have this brutal, primitive darkness.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking for you today. We have a massive stack of investigative reports, timelines, and accounts of the absolute legal chaos that followed these crimes.
So much chaos.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive isn't just to recount a true crime story. We really want to understand how a series of brutal double murders morphed into a full-blown sociological phenomena.
Complete with conspiracy theories, satanic cult allegations, and
A justice system that eventually turned its sights on the very people trying to solve the case.
yeah, it is a classic example of what happens when institutions panic. We're going to look at how a case with hard physical evidence,
A very specific gun.
right, a specific gun, how that hard evidence spiraled into a modern-day witch hunt.
Speaking of that gun, that is the one thing I want you, the listener, to lock onto right now. A .22 caliber Beretta pistol.
Specifically, a Beretta long rifle, Series 70.
Right. This gun is the forensic thread that ties 16 years of terror together. It's honestly the only thing that makes sense in a story that stops making sense very quickly.
Yeah, the facts get really muddy later on. So let's get into the timeline. Where does this nightmare actually begin? Well, if you look at the official timeline of the monster, most people usually start in the mid-70s. But to really understand the anomaly of this case, we have to go back to August 21st, 1968.
Okay, 1968.
Right. A couple was shot in a parked car near Florence.
And at the time, nobody was screaming serial killer, right? I mean, serial killers weren't really part of the cultural lexicon in the 60s.
Not at all. In fact, the term serial killer was largely an American concept that was just being developed by the FBI around that time. So the 1968 murder was dismissed as a localized, sordid crime of passion.
Just a tragic, one-off domestic dispute.
Exactly. The female victim's husband allegedly confessed and was convicted. The police wrapped it up, they filed it away, and the city moved on. It was viewed as an isolated incident.
But then there's this gap. 6 years of total silence. Until 1974.
Yeah, 1974 is when the pattern truly emerges. Another couple is attacked in a very similar fashion, and then it happens again.
And again.
Right. Suddenly, police realized that the isolated incident from 68 wasn't isolated at all. The ballistics matched. The same .22 Beretta used in 68 was back on the streets in 1974.
Which implies something completely terrifying about that 1968 conviction. Because if the husband was sitting in jail, how is his gun killing people 6 years later?
Exactly. That is the first massive crack in the foundation. Either the husband was innocent or the gun had changed hands. But from 1974 to 1985, a horrific method of operation established itself. The monster wasn't just killing randomly, he was hunting.
Let's talk about that profile. Who were the victims?
The victim profile was heartbreakingly consistent. We're talking about young, heterosexual couples, and you have to understand the social context of Italy in the 70s and 80s.
Right, it's different from the U.S.
Very different. Young people often live with their parents until marriage. Privacy was a total luxury.
So you can't exactly hang out in the living room if mom and dad are sitting right there watching TV.
Precisely. So there was this cultural ritual. Couples would drive out to the countryside to these secluded lovers' lanes for intimacy. These were spots that were supposed to be safe havens for young love.
And the monster turned these intimate moments into traps.
He did. The attacks almost always happened on moonless nights, usually on weekends. Over those years, 16 people.
8 couples.
Right, 8 couples were murdered.
But it wasn't just the kill count that caused the panic. It was the specific brutality of it. We need to discuss this signature without being gratuitous, but it's essential to understanding the psychology here.
It is. It's the hardest part to discuss, but it is crucial. The killer used that .22 Beretta to incapacitate and kill the couple. He usually targeted the male first to eliminate the threat, and then the female.
Right.
But the violence didn't stop there. Once the victims were deceased, the killer would drag the female victim away from the car and perform post-mortem mutilations.
Which completely moves it out of the realm of a crime of passion and into something else entirely.
Correct. This suggests sexual sadism, voyeurism, and a deep desire to desecrate or possess. The experts indicate that the killer likely watched these couples for some time before attacking.
Just lurking in the dark.
Yeah. It was this ritualistic aspect that terrified the public. It made people feel like they were dealing with something inhuman, a true monster.
And when the public is that terrified, the political pressure on the police becomes immense. They can't just stand at a podium and say, we're working on it. They need a face.
They needed a villain.
Right. And this is where the story shifts from a forensic investigation to a complete sociological disaster. The police were desperate. They needed a suspect who looked the part. Enter Pietro Pacciani.
Pacciani seems like he was literally cast by a movie director for the role of rural villain.
He really does.
He was a peasant farmer, uneducated, rough. He had a known violent history. He had actually been convicted of killing a rival back in 1951 because the man had slept with his girlfriend.
Wow.
Yeah. And he had a reputation for domestic abuse. He was essentially the town pariah.
So in the eyes of the police, he's the perfect monster. He's violent. He knows the countryside geography inside and out. It fits their narrative perfectly.
It fits their bias perfectly. They arrested him in 1993, which is years after the crimes had actually stopped. And the trial was an absolute media circus. It was like the O.J. Simpson trial of Italy.
Everyone was watching.
Everyone. And in 1994, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
Because the narrative was so tidy. The angry, violent, misogynistic farmer was the lone wolf terrorizing Florence. Case closed, right?
Except it wasn't.
Right, because the actual evidence was, well, let's call it flexible.
Flexible is a very generous word. The case against him was largely circumstantial. There was no DNA linking him to the crimes.
None at all.
None. And the famous .22 Beretta, it was never found in his possession. So in 1986, an appeals court stepped in and overturned the conviction. They basically looked at the prosecution and said, you haven't proved this.
So Pacciani is set to be a free man pending a retrial. But he never actually makes it back to court.
No, he didn't. He died of natural causes in 1998. And this leaves us in a terrible limbo. We still don't know if he was the killer, if he was framed, or if he was just a convenient scapegoat who happened to be a bad guy, but not the bad guy.
But the police couldn't just let it go. When the lone wolf theory started to crumble around them, they didn't step back and reassess the evidence. They doubled down.
They absolutely doubled down.
They pivoted from one angry farmer to something that sounds like incredibly bad fiction.
You're talking about the Companions of Snacks.
I still can't believe that's the real name the media gave this group. Companions of Snacks.
It sounds absurd in English, almost cute. It translates from a phrase that refers to having a snack or a light meal with wine.
Like drinking buddies.
Exactly. The theory was that Pacciani wasn't working alone. The police focused on his drinking buddies. Specifically, two men named Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti.
Two other men who fit that exact same rough peasant profile.
Right. And the authorities shifted the entire narrative from a lone serial killer to a satanic, cult-like group.
Which is quite a leap.
A massive leap. The prosecutor's theory was that these elderly, uneducated men were masterminding ritualistic sex slayings to collect body parts for dark rituals.
Okay, wait, let's just pause here. We went from a highly organized, stealthy predator who stalks couples in the pitch black without leaving a single trace
to a group of stumbling drinking buddies performing satanic rites.
That is a massive disconnect.
It is. Profilers tell us that serial killing is usually a solitary, deeply psychological compulsion. Group killing, especially for sexual sadism, is incredibly rare.
Almost unheard of.
Exactly. And yet, prosecutors claimed it was a group effort. They actually secured convictions against Vanni and Lotti.
How? Based on what evidence?
Largely based on Lotti testifying against the others in exchange for leniency.
Which is always a massive red flag. It's the classic, I'll tell you whatever you want to hear if you give me a lighter sentence.
Precisely. If you look at the source material, this snack companion theory is widely criticized by legal scholars and criminologists today. The evidence was weak, the investigative methods were incredibly controversial, and it really felt like the authorities were trying to fit the crimes into a narrative that satisfied the public's fear of the occult.
Rather than following the forensic facts.
Right. It was the era of the satanic panic, and they leaned right into it.
It feels like they were just throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. If it's not the farmer, maybe it's the farmer and his friends. If it's not them, maybe it's... And this is where it gets into straight-up thriller movie territory. Didn't they also try to pin this on wealthy elites?
They did.
Yeah.
This is what I mean by the investigative chaos. As the snack companions theory started to feel inadequate, because frankly these men did not seem smart enough to pull this off for 16 years, a new layer was added.
A level 2 theory.
Exactly. The idea was that the farmers were just the hired muscle commissioned by wealthy, mysterious professionals.
Like doctors and pharmacists.
Nobles, politicians, people who supposedly needed the body parts for high society occult rituals.
That sounds like a conspiracy thriller. But I guess it's almost easier for society to believe in a grand, evil cabal than a single broken individual doing this for no logical reason.
It is. It appeals to a certain deep-seated paranoia. But there was zero concrete evidence for this elite level. None. It just fed the media frenzy. Every week there was a new rumor, a new secret master pulling the strings.
Just clouding the facts.
So much so that it became nearly impossible to distinguish actual evidence from wild speculation.
And speaking of speculation versus reality, there is one story in our sources that perfectly illustrates how dangerous this investigation became. It involves an American author, Douglas Preston, and an Italian journalist, Mario Spezzi.
This is, for me, the most shocking chapter of the entire saga. Douglas Preston is a famous thriller writer. Mario Spezzi was a veteran crime reporter who had actually covered the monster case from the very beginning.
They teamed up to write a book.
Right, literally titled The Monster of Florence.
So they were doing what we're doing. They were looking at the sources, trying to connect the dots.
Exactly. They were interviewing witnesses, looking at the ballistic evidence, and critically analyzing the police's satanic cult theories. They actually developed their own theory involving the Sardinian Trail, which links back to that original 1968 case we mentioned.
And how did the authorities react to two writers doing actual competent investigative work? Did they say, hey, thanks for the help?
Quite the opposite. The prosecutor grew suspicious of them. He accused the writers of interfering with the investigation. He wiretapped their phones. And then he took the ultimate step.
Which was?
He arrested Mario Spezzi.
They threw the lead journalist in jail.
Yes. Spezzi was imprisoned on suspicion of being involved in the crimes himself.
You have to be kidding me.
I wish I was. They essentially tried to frame the journalist for the murders he had spent his career reporting on, and Douglas Preston was interrogated and forced to leave Italy.
That is absolutely wild. It sounds like a totalitarian state, not modern Italy in the 2000s.
It illustrates the extreme paranoia and dysfunction of the authorities at that time. If you question the official narrative, even if that official narrative was changing every single week, you became a suspect.
It's a terrifying example of a justice system just lashing out because it had completely lost control of the narrative.
Exactly.
So let's recap the scoreboard here. We have 16 dead people. We have a dead suspect, Pacciani, whose guilt is highly questionable. We have a cult theory that doesn't hold water. We have journalists being thrown in solitary confinement, and we still have no .22 Beretta.
And the case remains officially unsolved.
Let's step back from the circus for a second. If we strip away the satanic panic, the companions of snacks, the wealthy elites, what do the actual experts, the FBI profilers, say about who this person really was?
When you look at the psychological profile provided in the FBI reports and independent analysis, a much clearer picture emerges, and it completely contradicts the bumbling farmer theory.
What do they think?
Experts believe the true killer was highly organized, likely intelligent, but very socially isolated.
Which explains why they weren't caught. Pacciani was loud, he was publicly violent. This true killer would have been a ghost.
Exactly. A ghost. The killer had an intimate familiarity with the rural geography of Florence. You have to remember, these crimes happened at night, on dark dirt roads. To escape undetected time and time again requires knowing every back road, every exit route.
And the method of killing suggests something specific about their background too, doesn't it?
Yes, the efficiency with the weapon. That .22 Beretta is key. Shooting into a car in the dark is not easy, yet the killer was incredibly effective. Profilers have suggested a background in the military or perhaps hunting.
So they were comfortable with firearms and comfortable with stalking prey.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then there's the motivation. We touched on the mutilation earlier. This wasn't for money, and it wasn't a hitman doing a job.
Right.
The motivation appears to be pure sexual sadism. The killer got gratification from the act of control and the subsequent violation of the female victim. This is a deep-seated pathology.
It's not something you do with a group of friends after a few glasses of wine.
No, it's a private, incredibly dark compulsion.
What about the single versus multiple killer debate? Because the gun links everyone, but we mentioned the gun could have been passed around since the '68 killer went to prison.
That is the million-dollar question in this case. The ballistic evidence is the strongest link we have. The exact same gun was used in 1968 and throughout the 70s and 80s. That usually suggests a single hand.
But because the '68 killer was locked up,
The gun must have moved.
so the monster might have inherited the weapon or bought it on the black market.
That's a very strong possibility. Some theories suggest a family connection, that the gun stayed within a specific clan or circle of associates. But as for the act of the serial killings from 1974 to 1985, the consistency of the ritual points strongly toward a single, focused predator.
Not a cult.
Not a cult, a lone hunter.
It's chilling to think about someone that methodical operating for that long while the police were busy chasing satanic ghosts and locking up reporters.
It's a tragedy of distraction. Every resource spent investigating the satanic snack companions or the wealthy elites was a resource not spent looking for the real killer.
So where does that leave us today? The last confirmed murder was in 1985.
The trail has gone completely cold. The .22 Beretta was never recovered. Pacciani is dead. The other companions are dead. The prosecutor's grand theories have largely been discredited by history.
And meanwhile, the families of those 16 victims are left without any real answers.
That is the real tragedy here. The media circus, the books, the movies, they all overshadowed the actual loss of human life. These were young kids, mostly, just starting their lives. And they were failed by the system that was supposed to protect them.
So what is the takeaway for us? Why should you, sitting here decades later, care about a cold case from rural Italy?
I think this case serves as a powerful cautionary tale about tunnel vision. When investigators, or anyone really, decide on a narrative too early, they start filtering evidence to fit that story.
They ignored the profiling because it didn't match their peasant monster idea.
Exactly. It's confirmation bias on a lethal scale. And when fear drives an investigation, justice is usually the first casualty. We saw the system basically eat itself, arresting journalists, inventing cults, rather than just admitting they didn't know who the killer was.
There's one final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. We know the .22 Beretta is still out there somewhere. We know the DNA evidence was never conclusive.
Which leads to a very disturbing possibility.
Right. If the monster wasn't Pacciani and it wasn't a cult, then the real killer likely watched the entire investigation unfold.
Imagine that perspective for a second. Sitting in your living room in Florence, watching the evening news, seeing the police arrest a farmer, seeing them talk about satanic sex on national television, watching them chase their own tails for 20 years.
Knowing that as long as they were chasing ghosts, you were completely safe.
And if they were, say, 30 or 40 years old in 1985, they could very well still be alive today. An old man, perhaps, walking the streets of Florence, passing by the tourists, maybe even reading the books written about him.
A ghost in plain sight. On that unsettling note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. It's a heavy one, but a really important lesson in how justice can go off the rails. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious.